Everybody, thank you for joining this webinar live, and if not, and I hope you're going to enjoy the recording and you're watching this back later on at a different date. But this morning we've got a webinar hosted by Risual where we're going to talk about cybersecurity and the challenges that you have with that. So a quick introduction from myself. My name's Ian Stretton. I'm the Cloud Transformation Director here at Risual. So I kind of look after our propositions and our go-to-market strategy around Azure and modern workplace in particular. And of course, Risual will cover wider than that, which I'll come on to in a second. So today's agenda, we're going to do a bit of an introduction to Risual. So for those of you who don't know who we are, what we do, I'll tell you what we are and what we do. We'll go through some common security challenges that we're seeing in our client base, existing client base, and from the work that we kind of do in the community as well. We'll then go into how to build a secure organization with Microsoft services. We're obviously a Microsoft partner. Microsoft have actually helped and funded some of this webinar and provided some of the content for it. So a big thank you to Microsoft for doing that. So we're going to talk about how we could use the Microsoft tools, applications and services to help us to build that secure organization. And then we'll kind of finish off with how Risual can help, what services we can offer you directly, and advice and guidance. And then we'll open it up to questions and answers. And then we've got an offer at the end. It wouldn't be a webinar, or certainly this time of year, it's Christmas as well. So it wouldn't be a webinar without an offer. So into what do we do and who we are. So Risual, we've been founded back in 2005. We are what we call a pure play Microsoft systems integrator. So all of the technology we know and love and we've got experience in is Microsoft technology. That's not to say we don't have skills in other areas. We do. We have little bits of skills there, but our predominant technology and predominant focus is Microsoft tools and solutions. We're a UK-based organisation. Head office is based in Staffordshire, but our consultants and our team of people are actually all the way through the UK. So the fact that we class ourselves as therefore being UK-based. We've got lots of accreditations, so I'll come on to that from a Microsoft perspective in a minute, but we've got lots of accreditations around ISO. As we can see on the slide there, we've got Cyber Essentials, in particular around security. We're a member of the CISP, which is the NCSC Cyber Information Security Partnership as well. Our services, we are on a number of frameworks. So if you wanted to procure our services through a particular framework, clearly we'll work with you directly. That's not a problem, but we can also take orders and leads through things like G-Cloud, the DOS Digital Outcomes Framework, Bloom, North of England. If you've heard of those, you'll know what they are, and we can offer services through those channels as well. So in terms of what we do, as I said, we lead with Microsoft. We have three main kind of go-to-market propositions around cloud transformation, business transformation, and digital transformation. So cloud transformation is sort of my area, and that is really focused around Azure, Office 365, or modern M365, sorry, modern work, and that arena. Business transformation is very much around looking at how we can use IT and Microsoft services to fix a problem, if you like. And then we've got digital transformation, which is all around data and AI. Sorry, I missed one in the business transformation is Dynamics, sorry, is that Microsoft Cloud, so Dynamics 365 and how we can use that and deploy those services. And then we've got digital transformation, which is all around data and artificial intelligence and how we can basically what everybody's coining as the sixth industrial revolution around data and how we can help you to make the most of the data that you've got. We offer different services, so we've got advisory and consulting services. So that's where we can come in and look at your strategy, your business strategy, and your IT strategies. Combine those together. We can look at pointed kind of consultancy engagements as well, where if there's particular areas of the Microsoft stack that you need help and assistance to design and then deploy, we have services there that can help you. and with migrations as well, or with development of new technologies. The consultant team can help with that. We've then got our services or managed services function too. So that's where we've deployed those environments. We can support them and look after them for you. Everything from a fully managed service all the way through to sort of per hour based telephone support, if you need that through, and obviously everything in the middle. And then we've got skills. That's where we've got Microsoft trainers that could do some bespoke and specific administration training or end user training. And that team also do digital apprenticeships as well. So that's one for another webinar, but we could potentially talk to you about apprenticeships, and we would manage those apprenticeships into your organizations as well. And then the final one on here as well is solutions. So again, this is where we think about maybe taking an application or a service that you've currently got and working out how we could do it completely differently, but how we could modernize that and transform that. If there's something that doesn't quite fit in the Microsoft stack, if we needed to do some custom development, then our solution practice has developers and programmers, etc., that can help with those areas as well. As I mentioned, we're clearly very big in Microsoft, so we're a Microsoft Azure Expert MSP. We also have a number of advanced specializations or specialisms as well, so you can see those listed there, which we believe puts us in kind of the top few sort of Microsoft partners globally, not just in the UK. Certainly in the UK, we're up there at the top, but globally, we believe that there's not many partners that have got that level of accreditation with Microsoft. Added into that is the older sort of historic but still valid gold accreditations, of which you can see they're all listed sort of down there on the sort of right-hand side here. And then we've also earlier this year been accepted and had an invite into the to be a member of the Microsoft Intelligent Security Association framework and partnership that they've established as well. So we're really proud of that, and especially for this particular webinar, which is all talking about security, it's something we're extremely proud of course, as well. Just to mention as well, we're also Cyber Essentials, both internally, and we can advise, albeit we're not official accreditors for Cyber Essentials, because we've been through it. We can absolutely advise on how Cyber Essentials could be deployed, or how the technology can be deployed to support a Cyber Essentials accreditation. I'll just point out at this stage, so yes, this is a live meeting, and I'm going to waffle on for a good 45 odd minutes now about cybersecurity. So if there are any questions as we're going through, what you hopefully should see is there is a Q&A tab as part of the live meeting. I've got some colleagues on the call with us today, on the webinar, today. So if we do have questions, I've got my colleagues moderating those questions, and they will try to answer them as we can. And if there's something that we need to look at the end, then I can review that back, and we can bring that up right at the end. But please do, if you do have questions, please do post them through that Q&A chat. Okay, so let's talk proper security stuff. So we obviously do a lot of work with lots of different sectors around, and this slide is really looking to talk about some of the common challenges, because obviously everybody's not exactly the same, but these are some of the common challenges that we tend to find when we're working with organizations. So things like, how do we protect our reputation? And sometimes that's not just the reputation of the organization, of the IT department, back into your own organization. And sometimes I think over the last few years, if data's been lost or compromised or whatever, or security has been implemented in a way that it actually restricts productive working, sometimes the IT department can take a bit of a hit or a bit of a kicking there, or the reputation can go down within the organization. So there's that element. And then there's also the element of outside of the organization. So how do you protect your data? How do you protect your intellectual property? Obviously, we've all heard the stories about, you know, people leaving laptops on trains and all that kind of stuff. And how do you protect that data? And, you know, there's things like major organizations that have, you know, had announcements, shall we say, let's put it that way, about data that may have been lost. And that has really taken a hit on things like, you know, share prices and the value of the organizations as well. So how do you protect that reputation? That's absolutely one of the key things that we hear from security officers that we work with. Another one which is really key is, especially with everything that's going on in the moment in the UK, and I guess clearly around the world as well, is how can we support that sort of modern productivity? How do we support people being able to work dynamically, i.e. from home, from different sites, not just from that sort of office, that traditional office location anymore? So how can I support all of that, and how can our IT and organisation support that at the same time as still being secure and being confident at the same time that we're secure, and being confident that we can allow that to happen, knowing that we're not putting, first of all, our end users at risk, and then secondly, our data, and again, going back to the reputation, making sure we're not putting that reputation at risk as well. Another one is, what can we do to become compliant? So most organizations now have got some sort of compliancy that need to adhere to, obviously, whether that's a financial or whether that's an industrial sort of compliant regulation, or there's an authority that looks at things like cybersecurity and how you can work and interact with other organizations. So the first one is to understand, you know, obviously, what compliancy does your organization need to have? And then second of all, what does that mean? And how do I achieve it? And how can the IT systems help to achieve it? Because again, the compliancy isn't necessarily all about IT. There will be some processes and procedures in there as well that will help and support that. So how do we do that, and what does that look like? And then how much is enough? So I think when we look at cybersecurity, you know, there's always this sort of thought, well, you know, we just got to keep throwing money at it. And to be fair, there's an element there of, yeah, you do, but it's throwing it in at the right areas and at the right time, if you like, and planning the reasons as to why you're investing in certain areas to kind of bolster or support your situation. I think what I'll move it to the next slide as well. So more sector specific, I think just something to think about, I suppose, is when we're thinking about security, and when you're, let's say, if you are a security officer within your organization, and that's why you're on this webinar today, or you're listening to it at another time, is that generally it's when you're reporting on what's happened, it's generally a bad event that's happened. So data's been leaked, or an event has happened, security breach has taken place, and that's generally what you're reporting back to the rest of the board or to the senior management within the organization. So they're always looking at security, if you like, with an issue, if you like. They're thinking, well, it's never working, because all we ever hear about is breaches and issues. So you always get that kind of counter challenge, which is, well, why should I spend even more money when all I keep hearing is that we've had a data breach? Well, something I'll talk about later on is very much a case of trying to change that mindset to say, well, at the end of the day, we're never going to be able to stop everything, because the cyber attackers and these actors, that we'll call them, are always changing their attack. So we've got to try to always react to the attack. We might not catch it straight away, but it's about how we react to it and lock it down so that we don't end up having a major disaster. It's only a small breach rather than a major disaster. So that's what we've got to try and change, some of the mindset of the management, if you like, of the organization, and the people who are asking about the investment. So how much is enough? Well, never enough, as they say. So some particular sector challenges. So public sector, obviously we do lots of work in the public sector. What we're finding is it's very much about how do we secure the government data that is being kept? How do we make sure that applications accessing that data are also safe and secure? Obviously securing the remote workforce as well. And it's that balance then of adoption of those new technologies and making sure that they are secure and that we can still remain productive, but at the same and reactive as well to our partner organizations, but making sure that data is always secure. The financial and professional services is very much, again, these are just common challenges we see in these sectors. So very much a case of how do we protect our customers? How do we protect that critical, sensitive information that we hold about our customers and our clients? And again, I'm not saying that the public sector don't also have that challenge. I'm just saying some of this is a particular focus in finance and professional services. Again, that kind of thinks about, or that kind of alludes to that reputation. So if we lose any of that, then that can take an organization out. If a government authority loses that data, clearly it's not good, but it's not going to stop that. It's not going to stop that council from functioning, right? Somebody might get the sack, but it's not actually going to stop a council from working. Whereas in professional services, that could actually take out the whole company. So then it's protecting hardware, protecting the software, making sure that that transactional data as well is tracked all the way through, and increasing that customer trust so that they come back and spend more money or place more orders. Retail, again, on a similar vein, it's around, again, what we're finding with COVID and the sort of retail as it's moving forward is people aren't going to shops so much or stores. Everything or lots of stuff is now online. So how do we modernize our legacy systems to cope with that? How do those back office point of sale systems need to be improved to be able to do that? What are those new payment methods? How do we take that? Because obviously traditional high street, hand over some cash isn't the norm anymore. It's actually paying with credit card, touch-free sort of access, paying through mobile phones and those sorts of technologies these days. Bitcoin, again, that's something that's potentially coming down the line or is going to become more prevalent as well. And without kind of trying to make it even more of a point, if you think about, I guess, this sort of journey that we've been on in IT over the years, and if you think about, industrial revolutions, obviously the IT sort of revolution or IT industry in reality hasn't really been around that long. It's a good sort of 40, 50 years as has been prevalent, but it's only really been the last sort of 25 years that it's, IT is now the core of most people's businesses. And you think about, how long other industries have been around, 150, 200 years, 300 years in some cases, or even longer. You think about, well, IT really hasn't really been around that long. But even then, the journey that it's been on and the improvements that it's had has been, really fast, and it's difficult to keep up with. So traditionally, how we used to set up IT and how back in the day when I first started, as an apprentice, it was very much a case of you build your environment and you kind of ring fence it, if you like. You throw your arms around it, you put your networking boundary, you put your firewalls in place, you keep everything in your own data centers, and you kind of look after it yourselves, and that's how you do security. Obviously, what we then got is, well, we need to engage with customers better, we need to empower the employees, we need to transform products and optimize services. So obviously that added some challenges. So how do we go about doing that? How can we optimize things? So then you start to see the adoption of software as a service coming through. So things like Office 365, Google, Salesforce, Dropbox, ServiceNow, lots of different software as a service products, which is now obviously starting to extend that environment out. So it's no longer just that ring fence sort of looking after it yourself in your own data center sort of situation. Then we're saying, right, okay, well, we did have some mobile devices before, but now they were owned by us. Now we're in a situation where, okay, we don't own those devices anymore, but we still want them to have access to our systems. So whether that's an Apple phone or an Android phone, or if it's somebody's home PC, for example, we still want them to be able to access all that environment, but do it in a safe and secure way. Then you think about, oh, right, well, we've now got Internet of Things. So starting to put smart devices into products that you're shipping out, or you've used them to understand, what's happened with the shipping situation and the delivery. So you get things like Internet of Things that are starting to feed into the environment. And of course, then we start to think about, well, we've now got cloud technology for data center services as well. So whether that's infrastructure, platform as a service, or even that further software as a service, but all of that is obviously extending and pulling out the security requirements. Obviously, a lot of that you'll be already familiar with. So you think that, well, there's nothing new there. But what we're trying to think about is, okay, well, how do we therefore, or what strategies could help us to build that secure organization? So moving forward, again, we've got measures in place, we've got the risk mitigation in place to help us to confidently move forward. So how can we do that? What is there that's out there that can help us to combat that? Our recommendation at Risual, and obviously working with Microsoft, and this is a very big thing within Microsoft at the moment. I mean, it has been for a while, but I think certainly over the next 12 months, you're going to see lots of reference to this and conversations about this as well, is zero trust. So it's not a common phrase, but I think there's not enough, for me, there's not enough people talking about it. And sometimes it means different things to different people, because actually the zero trust is a strategy. You know, it should align to your own internal business strategy as well, but bringing in security where it's possible. And there's a few kind of core components to it. So the first one is really around user access. So it's providing access and control and protections for mobile and cloud assets outside of that traditional network. The business data and applications outside of the corporate network need to be protected, and that doesn't just necessarily have to be via a VPN connecting back to that on-premises environment. So it's all kind of really focused around how can we do that, how can we provide that user access and do it securely. The next kind of area or lead into is around modern security operations. So if you think about, traditionally, we've always, or since we've had IT, we've had an IT department that's looked after IT. And I think security has kind of been part of that. You may have had one or two people that looked at it. But now what we need to have is that shift into this sort of modern security operation. So security is part of every single thing we do. Everything we implement, there's got to be a security kind of connotation. Okay, what security's included? How can we improve the components of the overall solution as we develop through, as well as having obviously a much more definitive and defined focus on security operations. And then finally, the sort of back office data center. So it's looking at adding security. It's looking at developing workloads and applications that have been traditional. You know, I've been talking to customers this week that have still got things like Windows 2008 server with applications that are running on it because they're business critical, and clearly they're out of date in terms of support, and therefore there is a security risk there. We're not saying, you know, all of a sudden that data is going to get lost and it's going to blow up. It's not like the old Millennium bug from, you know, back in 2000. Everybody's not panicking thinking something's going to blow up at some point, but you are putting yourself at risk by having that in your environment. So how can we improve those? How can we go away and move away maybe from things like the traditional IP and internet protocols and look more at modern modern security protocols to help us with it? Now, zero trust, it's been around for a while. So here's a bit of a history lesson. It was so there was a forum, which was the Jericho Forum. It was formed back in 2003-04, and they were very much focused on trying to redefine really security in IT and trying to understand, you know, what can we do moving forward. They recognized the fact that things were changing and moving away from that traditional data center. So how could they bake in recommendations of security? So that forum was officially founded, which was multiple organizations coming together. Underneath there, you had things like network access control as well. So firewalls and networking equipment started to have intelligence built in that would check your environment or check your users as it was coming through, and the access request. So it started the sort of process for sure, and really started to help. Back in 2010 was where we actually saw the sort of first coining, if you like, of the term zero trust, which was developed in a report from Forrester. There was an individual there, one of the consultants there, coined that term, and that's where it's kind of come from, essentially, is this sort of zero trust term. And as we move forward, we've then got obviously things like conditional access that's been released. We've got more definitive guidelines now on how to help and how to implement zero trust environments. And one that obviously we're sort of a member of, but we'd very much advocate as well, is the National Cyber Centre in the UK, National Cyber Security Centre, sorry, NCSC in the UK. So back in 2019, they released a lot of really good guidance on what zero trust actually meant, how to implement it in your organisation. And I think there's lots of people that maybe initially thought that was for UK government and kind of public sector authority services. It isn't. It can clearly be used for the public sector as well, and for your own organisations. And it's really good advice and guidance. And then what we're starting to see now is there's lots more of the kind of major IT services and vendors that are releasing their own versions, if you like, of zero trust, or how their products overlay onto that. And of course, Microsoft are certainly one of those. So in terms of, some of the principles of it, so these are the core principles. I'm not going to read it through. I'll leave it on the screen so you can have a look. But the ones I'm going to go through in particular, I'm going to highlight for you. Just if it works, there we go. So the first one really to, I suppose, draw to the attention is that validate trust explicitly, or another phrase that I've seen it called is verify. So what you're trying to do is always, as a user is accessing something, or a device is trying to access, that you're going to validate and challenge that at the very beginning through policies and procedures and engines that I'll come on to talk about. So it's what's your user identity? Where are you coming from? What device are you using? What is it you're trying to access? Are there any anomalies to any of that? Does anything look slightly dodgy, or is anything not quite normal? And we can look back at some of the history as well as to how you've accessed data traditionally. So is anything out of the normal? And in which case we're going to continually verify. And this isn't just to open a session. What we need to be thinking about here is that continuous validation as well. So every time data is trying to be accessed, every time a new document's going to be opened, every time somebody opens up an email, or sorry, that's going, every time somebody goes into the Outlook or goes into Teams or whatever, that's the constant challenge that should always be implied. The next one is around this sort of principle of least privilege. Again, this is something that's been around for a while, but what we're trying to achieve here is we're not trying to, some people will look at this and go, well, ultimately we're going to limit productivity. So if we're not allowing people the permissions that they need, then how can they do the work? Well, what we're trying to achieve here is, well, what permissions do you need and when do you need them? And then we'll give you that we'll give you that permission for the period of time, and then we'll take it away. So for argument's sake, if you've got administrators that need to go in and, I don't know, do user account administration, for example, or to make some changes to IT systems, why would we just give them administrator access explicitly and never really challenge that? Why wouldn't we just give them the administrative access they need at the time that they need it, and then remove it so that they aren't then potentially compromised, or if their account does get compromised, you stop what they call that lateral movement with an actor or an attacker coming in and using that privileged account to then get into other systems. And we can do that by implementing this idea of least privilege. And then the final one I kind of really just want to point out is this assumed breach. So again, as you're developing plans, as you're improving the security of your environment, as new technologies start to come in to assist us with, securing this environment, is we should always be thinking about, well, we need to assume breach. So by segmenting networks, by segmenting users from devices, from applications, by encrypting those sessions as well as they come through. So encrypting by default and encrypting the data at the end. Using things like data tagging as well, so that we know, and that the engines and the policies and the systems know that the data that is being accessed is tagged at a certain level, and therefore certain people or certain applications can access, whereas others can't. And the other thing we need to be thinking about as well is obviously looking at analytics. So constantly reviewing the data, constantly reviewing what's going on in the environment, picking out any anomalies and any suspicious behavior and reacting to that quickly. So you're also always, assuming that somebody is in your environment and is doing something that they shouldn't be. And clearly there are tools and services to do that. So just thinking about that in a bit more detail. So we can see that now, as we've developed and Microsoft have developed sort of operating systems, we've now got lots of information and what we call signals that we can check on. So we've got things like device versions, we've got device management, we've got things like TPM chips and security facilities now that are within the hardware that end users are actually using to access these environments. So we need to take those signals and all of that information from those systems, and we can use that to determine a device's risk from where somebody's accessing it from. We've then got user signals or user risk. So we've got things like multi-factor authentication we can use. We've got behavioral analytics. We've got locations that they're coming in from. We've got the data that they're trying to access as well. All of that can be, as I say, used as a signal to develop the overall picture as we go through into this sort of middle bit here, which is around the decision-making process. So this is the decision engine, which is, and again, there are different tools and services I'll come on to that can do this, but they will, based on your organizational policy, based on settings that you will think about and implement, these rules will then be evaluated as the signals kind of get ingested, and then we can enforce it as well. So through modern applications, through software as a service applications, they will all be able to plug into, or should, and as I say, this is where that kind of constant improvement and development comes from, is we need to make sure that they're on the latest version so that they can really plug into this decision making and policy engine, so that the access is always challenged, as I say, all the way through, and where appropriate blocked, or where, again, another way of thinking about it as well is where further challenge might be required. So you might be able to have, for argument's sake, you might want an end user to have read-only access, and that's fine, and there's no challenge necessarily there. It's allowed through, but as soon as they go to read-write, or they go to download a copy of that, then no, actually we're going to challenge you further. Who are, not necessarily who are, because that would have been detected, but why do you require this? Or we're going to ask you for more authentication information, so a multi-factor authentication request if you're going to download that data, and then also where are you going to download it to, or where are you going to edit it on? So what's that device that it is that you're going to edit through? So all of that should be happening constantly and all the time. Microsoft have absolutely helped out as well in terms of developing a strategy, and of course using their technology to help with it, and the recommendations in terms of a rapid adoption program or a rapid modernization program is really what you should think about, is starting with the users and the productivity first. So again, like I say, we're not trying to stop productivity for your end users, but we need to make sure that an appropriate level of challenge is in there. So it's things like top priorities would be to implement things like multi-factor authentication, passwordless authentication as well is a fairly common trend. So it's talking about, using biometric data to actually as a password rather than somebody typing in a username and password, that absolutely massively helps or massively hinders attackers, but helps end users because it's actually really easy for them to do. The devices, so again, making sure they're on the latest versions, making sure that they're encrypted, or where the data potentially is going to be stored is an encrypted area. So if it were to get lost or if it were to be compromised, then we can either remove that data or we're safe in the knowledge that it's at least encrypted. We've then got, come on slide, move on, there we go. So a second focus area would be to then modernize the security operations themselves. So have you got the facilities to track all of this information that is then available because we're doing all of this tracking, we're doing all of these services. So how do we improve applications and the tracking of it? And then finally, we've got that sort of data center and the back end services. So how can we then either maybe migrate some of those data center services to a cloud-based technology? How is that going to help us? And what additional benefits does that provide? Now, as you can imagine, as I say, Microsoft have developed this sort of cybersecurity reference architecture, and I very much, if you can see the link at the top of the screen there, I'd very much urge you to go and take a look at this. You probably noticed that some of my slides are taken from areas of this as well. So again, thank you to Microsoft for helping with some of the content. But this slide takes a while to build, by the way, and I'll try and explain it as we go through. What this is trying to show you is that with each of the different areas of a data center service or an IT service of an organization now, there are products in Microsoft's tool set and suite that can help you. So again, if you think about, starting with an on-premise data center, clearly you've got, operating systems there. So we need to be thinking about, first of all, Windows 2019, or upgrading to a later version that is more secure and is known as a secure operating system. Then we can start to factor in things like our endpoint devices. So we've got obviously anything that's Windows 10, 11, deploying those operating systems. We can also do Mac and iOS and Android management, and that can be done through Microsoft Endpoint Manager. And we can implement security policies, network protection. There's lots of stuff in the Endpoint Defender, which will come up in a second, that will help us with that as well. But then we've got things like identity access. So let me go back one, sorry. So traditionally we had sort of that on-premises Active Directory. Now if we can join that up with Azure Active Directory, and even with a shift, if you want to go even further, potentially removing your on-premises Active Directory to use things like the Azure Active Directory as your primary authentication mechanism is a good thing. But actually, or in most organizations, there is that kind of joint working together. But by doing that, you've got things like passwordless functionality, things like MFA, Hello for Business, authenticator applications, etc. that you've got. You've got identity protection, so Microsoft provides you a service that can have a look at identity, things like passwords that aren't particularly secure, recommend better ones, or look for if somebody's trying to break into an account with behavioral analytics and analysis, that can all help as well. We've got services like Azure AD B2C and B2B. So again, rather than having an idea, if you need to work with another organization, rather than either you having another account on their systems or them having an account on your systems, well, why couldn't you use their own account to access your systems, which is more secure? You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about managing it or looking after the passwords or reminding them that the passwords ran out or anything like that. If they're using their own identity to verify themselves, and then you trust that through the business to business or business to consumer, that's a much better and a much more secure method. And of course, we can use those services to then identity services, to then access software as a service. And as we go through that, this is where we can then see conditional access starts to come in, which is part of Azure AD. So conditional access is actually, for me, it's massively underused, but it's an absolutely brilliant area of the Microsoft stack that we should really be tapping into a lot more. With that conditional access, we then have a route, so not just to software and cloud-based services and software as a service services. We can then also potentially access on-premise services, but using still that conditional access that we've kind of then set up, and that challenge, continuous challenge that we talked about as well. Continually verify. So we can use Azure ID Proxy to potentially publish those internal applications out to, and when I say publish them out, what I mean is provide them access through the internet potentially, but using conditional access. We've then looked at the data center, so you've now got hybrid infrastructure rather than just on-premises infrastructure. So things like AWS, Azure, obviously, some of the Google Cloud, obviously there are other vendors in there as well. And how do they supplement and support? So you've got primary connectivity models like ExpressRoute, which is a dedicated connection, or you could implement private links potentially as well, so private VPNs from a VPN to VPN, or site to site, sorry, VPN, through and into that environment. Ooh, come on screen, there we go. Across all of that, we have facilities, as you can imagine, from the Azure stack, which again will help. So we've got something called Defender for Cloud, which has just been recently rebranded. So that's really going to help us across both on-premises and in multiple clouds as well. That's really going to help us to protect that and report on the security posture of these servers and of these applications and services. Of course, in Azure world, if you are setting up infrastructure there, you've got lots of services here. So you've got Azure firewalls, web application firewalls, DDoS protection, Key Vault as well. So again, rather than or moving forward as you develop applications, rather than having kind of static passwords within an application, you should be using things like Azure Key Vault to maintain that and maintain the security. So you don't have a password, you have a token. Things like Azure Bastion to provide remote access in, and obviously you've got things like Azure Backup. And above all of that, you've then got things like Secure Score and the compliance dashboard. So again, going back to how do you check whether I'm compliant or not, you've got things like Secure Score that's really going to help you to understand what is your current security posture, and more importantly, how can you improve it as well, because it's not just going to tell you what you've currently got, it's going to tell you how you can improve, and clearly that will be constantly updated by Microsoft as well to provide the latest and greatest guidance. Again, you've got Defender for Cloud, which can do, as I touched on, you've got cross-platform, so it can do lots of different software as a service, platform as a service, as well as infrastructure as a service, rather. And you've also got Defender for IoT, so if you have got Internet of Things devices out there, you can absolutely get those protected as well using the Defender toolset. Over and above all of that, again as well, you might want to, and this modern security thought that I kind of hopefully opened your eyes to before. So how would you do some of that? Well, again, the services there with Microsoft Sentinel, where we can receive these signals, and we can receive this analytical data, and we can find out what's going on as it's happening, and then we can use things like orchestration and UEBA, which is I can never remember what it stands for. User analysis, essentially. So user behavioral analysis. So we can look at all of that information, or Sentinel can help us to look at that information using things like artificial intelligence to really pick out those threats, and that will do, in inverted commas, the donkey work, and then raise that up to us as the humans, if you like, to review and then realize, do we need to do something about this, or is this normal behavior? We've then got securing privileged access. So again, as I say, we've got things like privileged access workstations. So if you've got administrators that work from a particular location, again, we can define those in the stack. So especially if they're doing administrative work or sensitive work, then we can define a privileged access workstation for them to securely access as well. We've then got information protection. So this is where we can then think about going down that stack, thinking about the data itself and where the data is not necessarily just stored, but how it's tagged when it is stored, so that when it's being accessed, again, we can add a further sort of challenge response when an end user or an application is trying to access that data. So we can implement that information protection and report on obviously all of that through things like data governance, advanced e-discovery and compliance managers. Again, you might have different people in your organization that will be more focused on these areas, but all of that, as you can imagine, will also report through into things like Microsoft Sentinel. And then kind of finally, as I touched on before, you've then got the compliancy areas. So you've got a Microsoft compliance score, and I know it's small, but you can see it hopefully that it popped up down here as well, is around Microsoft Secure Score. So you've got two kind of versions of Secure Score. You've got the Secure Score that comes with Azure, or that is part of Azure, and then you've got Secure Score that's part of Office 3 or Microsoft 365. And they are bringing some of that together now to that Microsoft compliance score. So if you have got both of those areas and environments, then you can kind of look at it as a whole together, or obviously if you've got them individually, you can look at each one of those areas individually as well. And then in terms of people security, so you've then got things like attack simulators. So if you want to prove to your organization that you have particular compliance in place, then that's possible through attack simulators that are part of the Microsoft suite. You've got insider risk management as well. So if you have, for argument's sake, if you're taking over an organization or you're doing divestiture, and maybe the organization that you're working with, you need what they used to call Chinese walls, or you need that sort of separation within an organization, you've got things like insider risk management and communication compliance that can really help you to even protect your own organization from itself, if you like. So yeah, that's a reference architecture. There are other reference architectures as you go through. So there are different areas of this where you really focus in on. So very much would urge you to take a look at that reference architecture, and obviously we can help you to understand that as well. Really just focusing in, I suppose, on some of those key areas. So we talked about, verifying explicitly, using least privileged access, and assuming breach. So what do some of those products look like from a Microsoft perspective? So again, you've got Azure AD that can help you with the identity. You've got Microsoft Defender for identity that will help you to really make sure that you've got the best possible situation for your identities as well. Your endpoints, of course, you've got Microsoft Defender, and then you've got Endpoint Manager. Obviously, traditionally you had System Center Configuration Manager, or SCCM. That is now part of this Microsoft Endpoint Manager, suite, which is essentially a combination of Intune and SCCM coming together to provide you a really good, enriched management facility. And then you've got over on the right-hand side, or coming through this policy engine, so you've got Microsoft Conditional Access, which is, core to that kind of continual, I get the words out, continual challenge of, okay, I'm going to provide you access, but now I'm going to challenge that every single time you go to do anything, and it will use these facilities like information protection to say, yeah, okay, has this data been tagged as sensitive, and therefore is the end user that's coming through somebody that should be able to look at this, and are they using a device that is allowed to manipulate that data? So doing that all the way through, and then you've got Sentinel that can report on all of that as it's happening in real time. Just conscious of time, and I've got a lot of slides to do, so I'm going to really whistle through these next few. So we've got, this is again example, very high level example of a potential attack. So you've got things like potential areas of attack. So you've got things like phishing emails, and people will open attachments, which will then take you to a URL, which then causes problems in your environment, or potentially put software on your endpoints that you don't want. You've got IoT exploitation even. So obviously, you might think that your fridge that can now report back if you've ran out of milk is a really cool thing, but actually that's now an attack point or attack vector for somebody to come in and try to exploit an organization's environment. And it might not necessarily be that it's going to exploit you, but it might exploit the organization that you plug into. So attacks can be happening that way. Your identities as well, of course, compromised. So people trying to attack a particular identity, and as I say, if that identity has a level of administrative privileges, what the attacker will then try to do is, once account has been compromised, they'll try to what they call do a lateral attack or a lateral movement. So they'll then try to attack and use those those privileges to set themselves up with another account that may have even higher privileges, and then of course it goes on from there, and you can see how that starts to wind up into a serious attack. So again, how do we protect from those things? So you've got Defender for Office that's going to help from an Office 365 and an email perspective, of course. You've got Defender for Endpoint that's going to help with your endpoint protection. You've got Defender for IoT, of course, that's going to help with the endpoints for in an Internet of Things arena. You've got identity protection that's absolutely going to help, of course, with Azure AD itself, working to stop that brute force attack. And then you've got Defender Identity that's going to do the challenge response as well as the attacker tries to move across and do these lateral movements. And then you've got Defender for Cloud Apps. Now, this is, again, something that's massively underutilized for me. It used to be called Cloud App Security, or CASB as an acronym, and they've rebranded this now to Defender for Cloud Apps. Essentially a really good facility. It's a proxy essentially into your data, into your environment. Again, there's lots of people. If you've got certainly an E3 or certainly an E5 sort of Microsoft E5 license, Microsoft 365 E5 license, for example, or even the E3, you've got elements of this already. And most people don't use it because sometimes it's maybe seen as a little bit difficult to configure. Actually, they're making it a lot more straightforward, a lot easier to understand. And actually, when you look at what it can do and the capabilities it's got, it is a massive part of your toolkit that you should really be looking at. So I can't champion any more loudly, I suppose, to have a look at the Defender for Cloud Apps for sure. And of course, we can help you with that. Underpinning, like I say, all of that is your Microsoft Sentinel doing the reports coming through, and then you've got the insider risk management and facilities that you've got there as well. With all of these signals and with all of this information that is generated, or all of these challenges and responses that are happening all the time, of course, an individual or a human, they would find it too difficult to try and look after that. So it'd be a bit like, you turning on the light in the fog. What we can do with artificial intelligence and machine learning is we can train systems to look out for this information and really shine the light on it as well. So using artificial intelligence is going to help with that, and it may also help to shine a light on where we're not looking. So if it's recognizing certain patterns and we go, there's definitely something happening over here, you might want to take a look at it and then tell me, is it actually a problem or is it a false negative? In which case, train me up even further, and then I don't need to look at that again. Actually, yes, it is a more important issue when we need to delve even further. So really using this next generation, I suppose, of machine learning and artificial intelligence is massively helping. So this is where Microsoft's threat intelligence kind of environments that they've built from the ground up and is now embedded in all of the applications and services, obviously on the cloud that they do, and is coming into on-premise systems as well if it's not already there. They're taking all these signals, they're doing all of this from things like identity and solutions and emails and applications, and obviously all the new modern authentication, rather than just kind of is it allowed? Yes, no, through an internet protocol, through IP and through firewalls. It's now, modern security will have that challenge response, and things like CASB or the cloud security, as I say, will be constantly monitoring that as well as it's being accessed and going through. So that's all helping with this threat intelligence. So they're receiving all those signals coming through, the data collection and normalization analytics. All of that is now available to the applications to work with and start to make decisions sort of on your behalf as you train it. And also it's going to take signals from each of the endpoint sort of applications and services as well to, again, feed into that decision-making process, ultimately to then provide you with the human sort of input as well to train it and to make sure that it's absolutely, what you need to achieve. So just in terms of, I guess, trying to get to a point, because obviously this is a fairly big topic. So, you can talk for forever and you can really delve into certain areas. But I think if I go back to some of the questions that are raised at the beginning around, how do I, what's the mind shift, and how do I provide myself with resilience, and how do I provide the sort of services to my organization? And I think about there's an element here of mind shift. So again, as a security officer within your organization, you need to be trying to change the mind of not just the end users, but of course the decision makers, the management teams within the organizations, and thinking about this mind shift of what we built originally was, build it reliable, make sure it's designed not to fail. So it's got to always be up. And now the mind shift really needs to start to move towards across to this design to recover quickly. So let's, it can never be up all the time and 100% of the time. But what we can do is make sure that if it ever does go down, or there's a component of it that goes down, that we can recover that component, or we can recover that system quickly. So that is a bit of a mindset shift, of course. The next one is prevent. Used to be always, let's prevent every possible attack. Let's stop everything. Let's throw our virtual arms around the environment and not let anybody in. It's never going to happen. We're never going to be able to, we're never going to let anything through. And we need to kind of move away from that, I think, because that's just not possible these days with obviously COVID, with everybody working from home. So what we need to do is open that out, but then assume compromise and implement that kind of that regular, as I say, constant challenge to assuming that there's compromise, assuming that the people, even in your environment, even your trusted people, are attacking you. And if you assume that and you think about that, then we can obviously detect those services really quickly, those attacks, really quickly. If you think about some of the advantages of now the cloud era, so again, a traditional approach used to be these boxes. This can be a little bit difficult to understand. What we're trying to, I suppose, represent here is that each of these boxes are a responsibility, or an area of concern, or a compliancy regulation, for argument's sake, that you need to be thinking about. And that's the traditional approach. So you kind of think, well, lots of the empty boxes are things that we haven't been able to do yet. We just haven't had time. We just can't deal with, or we don't have the cash to be able to deal with it. Some of the orange ones are things that have been satisfied, so we have been able to achieve, and we are meeting those. And then the blue ones are things that we're partially doing, and if we had a bit more cash, or we had a bit more time, or we had a different operating system, for example, then we could achieve those things. And what we're finding now is that actually, as we implement some of the cloud, try that again with a click. There we go. As we implement some of the cloud-enabled technologies that obviously Microsoft and other people have been developing over the years, is that taking some of that responsibility is the wrong word, taking some of that workload away by implementing cloud technology that's already got some of these regulations and compliancy services built into it, means it's a much easier job. So a lot of what was, unmet responsibilities, this grey box now means that by moving into the cloud, we can now allocate that to the service provider instead. So next, now Microsoft's responsibility to, for argument's sake, look after the location of the data and make sure that that's in the UK and not compromised or what have you. So we can really start to shift some of that responsibility away, which means that we've then only got to focus on, well, a few things. I say a few, there's still lots obviously there, but there's still, the focus can then start to shift across. We can also use cloud-based security capabilities as well. So all the reporting facilities that, even if it means that we can't necessarily, the cloud isn't going to fix it, but it can at least report on it to then give you advice and guidance as to how you can fix it, then we can implement and leverage that cloud-based security capability. And then using that and combining that together means we've got a much more solid sort of area and framework to work from. So in terms of next steps, obviously we've sort of mentioned this as well, things like Secure Score can really help to understand where you're currently at with your environments, especially if it's a Microsoft Azure or M365 environment. We can absolutely look at that. Perform a security review, see where you're at as well, and get some reports from an external source to review and understand what you're doing. Make a list of priorities, make a plan as well, and I wouldn't say stick to it, because obviously the plan will always change, but at least if you've got a priority, you can then tackle them and everybody knows again within your organization as to what you're trying to achieve and why you're trying to achieve them. But obviously you've got to continually review that, and you've got to continually review those plans and those ideas that you've got as to how you're going to help. Now, moving on to how we can help. So again, we've been doing cybersecurity since we were an organization that was created back in 2005, and in fact one of our excuse me, one of our directors and co-owners actually was the first European MVP with Microsoft around security. So as I say, one of the people who actually set the company up has got security at their core and at their heart, and has always implemented that throughout anything that we've ever done since the company's been established. So we have developed a client security journey. So I won't go through this in too much detail now, but I'm really happy to talk to you about this sort of offline. But we have developed a process to say, well, have you got areas of your organization that have been either designed or implemented or planned? Have you got a strategy? And we've got key points here as to how we can help you through that journey and help you to implement those services. We also have, as you can imagine, sort of off-the-shelf services as well. So we've got a cybersecurity assessment that we can offer you, which is based on the NCSC 10 steps. So if you remember, I referred to them before around their sort of zero trust recommendations and guidelines. Well, they've developed a 10 steps to cybersecurity. What we will do, and again, this isn't an accreditation as such, this is more of a good set of guidance, and we can come in and basically review where your organization is at on that journey and against those 10 steps. And give you then that advice and guidance as to how you can develop and move that forward. So obviously that's on the screen for you to have a more of an in-depth read through. The areas that it covers are things like risk management, engagement and training, asset management, architecture and configuration, vulnerability management, identity and access management, data security, logging and monitoring, incident management, and supply chain security as well. The output to that is we replay back to you essentially our findings. So it's a bit like like I say, it's a bit like an audit where we'll come in and ask you to prove certain things or show us where you're at with certain things, and then we'll report back to you on what we think the security status of your organization is against those principles, against those 10 principles. We also have a more pointed security review. This is very much more focused on the Microsoft clouds. So if you think about, again, Microsoft 365, Azure, Dynamics, are kind of three main go-to-market sort of areas of our Microsoft stack. We can do a security review with you on those as well. So using things like Secure Score and obviously our skills and expertise at deploying and implementing these environments, we can do this for you. This one is a slightly shorter gig engagement than the last one, just sort of 4 days where we do some discovery. We'll assess the services with you, and then we'll work with you to plan out the next steps. So again, going back through that, let's plan out where you're at. Let's discover where you're at. Let's plan out what you need to do next, and then see where you need any help, further help and support. So final one is the call to action. So I'm going to recommend that you build that plan and we can work together, whether that's you working together within your own organization and pulling different parts together, whether that's us working with you, whether that's Microsoft working with you. But please do, build that plan out, and let's see how we can define that. Let's review those strategies and priorities. Obviously, we want to help you if you're having challenges trying to change that mindset of the management team. Please do come to us. We've got architects, and we've got people that can help to help you to raise those arguments and to change those mindsets within your organization. So have a think about, things like, what are your 3 to 5 strategic priorities? What are you trying to achieve? List them down, and then let's think about how we can support and work with you on them. So I will say, hopefully, if there has been questions, I'm hoping my colleagues have been answering them as we go through. If there has been any kind of key ones, I guess if my colleagues want to come off mute and just raise that to me, because I can't see any at the moment. So that's fine, but just come off mute as I'm just finishing off here. But just in terms of a sort of a thank you for listening in today, and to try and help with some of this planning, as we've been mentioning, for joining today and or for reviewing this webinar, we're offering you a free consultancy session. So if you're interested in that, where we can review where you're at with your cybersecurity, where you may be at on the journey, or if there's particular areas of tactical kind of support and assistance that you might need, we can review that with you in a free consultancy session. In order to get that, if you go to the link that's at the bottom there, which is risu.al, which is our little URL shortener, /free workshop. Put that into a browser. It takes you to a form. Obviously, it asks you for certain bits of information. You can fill that out, and then we can come back to you. If you prefer not to do that, or you already have a contact with Visual, please go to your account manager, get in touch with them, and we can arrange a session that way. Also, through our website, if you have a look, if you're new to Visual, please do have a look at our website, visual.com. Feel free to email us at inquiries if you are interested in anything that I've been through today, or obviously give us a call as well. And we've also got our LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook sites that you can engage with us through as well. So please do go and have a look at us on there, and follow us, and like us, I think is the phrase these days as well, on those particular platforms as well. So I guess I'll leave that one on. I'll just open it up. Were there any questions? Is anybody? I don't think there is. No. So we'll close it there. Thank you very much for listening and listening to me waffle on for an hour. Hopefully this has been of interest for you. And like I say, please do get in touch with us if there's anything that you would like to talk about.